Every house needs a solid foundation. Here in South Louisiana, we know that better than most. You can tell when the foundation begins to shift if the soil is soft. The walls crack. All of a sudden, you can't open a door. It gets stuck. A home built on soft soil naturally begins to move over time. And the same holds true for our faith. If the foundation isn't solid, if prayer, truth, and love don't run deep, then the soul begins to falter and crack beneath the pressure. We might look fine on the outside, but sooner or later something on the inside is going to give us away. And that makes sense, given that so many of us live with quiet insecurities. We chase peace, but we build it on personal comfort instead of communion with God and neighbor. We try to hold our families together by effort alone. If I just work hard enough, we'll stay together. They'll keep going to church. If I just keep pushing, maybe they'll come back. But without grace, we know that it often has the opposite effect. And still, we expect our lives to stand firm even when our prayer slips to the edges of our day. It's no wonder our interior life begins to buckle beneath the weight. As Christ reminds us, a house divided within cannot stand without. The wound beneath much of our fatigue isn't necessarily busyness, it's often complacency. We forget that Christ must be the cornerstone of our lives. In today's gospel, Jesus climbs the mountain to pray. Even the second person of the Trinity centers his life around prayer. He spends the whole night speaking with his Father before he calls the 12, to indicate to us how important this decision is. Every decision, every mission, every act of leadership of ours must also begin here, on the mountain of prayer, in silence and communion with the Father. Remember, liturgically, the altar in our sanctuary stands on a raised platform. It represents the mountain of the Lord. Just as Moses climbed the mountain to intercede with God on behalf of the Israelites, so does the priest in persona Christi climb the mountain of the Lord to intercede with God on behalf of his people. We too are called to approach the foot of the mountain to speak to God in prayer. How often do we approach this mountain to speak with God before we make any major decision in our lives? First, Jesus prays, and then he names the 12 apostles: Simon, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, Simon, Jude, and Judas. These weren't perfect men. We have it right there. Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. These were fishermen. One was a tax collector. One was a zealot. Yet from them, Christ builds his church. A living temple founded not on their success, but on his steadfast love for them and their trust in him. And St. Paul reminds us in Ephesians, "You are no longer strangers and sojourners, but members of the household of God, built upon the foundation of the apostles, with Christ himself as the capstone." This is not an abstract idea. It's the reality we enter into every time we approach the altar. We belong to this household, this particular local church, built upon the firm foundation of prayer, truth, and fidelity. That's the only way it can stand. And yet, how easy it is for us to live like strangers in our own Father's house. How quickly we backslide from communion into individualism, protecting our comfort zones. We forget that being Catholic means being apostolic, to stand on the teaching, the witness, and the prayer that Christ entrusted to his whole church. We're human. We slip up. We fall back into the illusion that faith is a personal preference rather than a sacred duty. But that's why the Lord has built a mountain right here in the middle of these pastures so that we can climb his mountain and be called back to him. He calls us back to prayer, back to the very heart of the church, his Son. Because at this altar, we get to touch the very same mystery that the apostles touched. Jesus Christ, the cornerstone rejected by the world, but as we know, he is the bread of life who holds us all together. Here, the household of God is renewed time and time again, and the foundation is restored. Here, strangers become sons and daughters so that all might become brothers and sisters in truth, not just in name, united in the body of Christ, whose head is Jesus. When we approach the Eucharist, we stand upon the same apostolic foundation that Simon and Jude gave their lives to defend. The truth that Christ is Lord, that his church is one, and that our lives are meant to boldly proclaim his glory. The lives and deaths of the apostles remind us that holiness is not built on reputation, but on prayerful mission. They began where Jesus began, listening to the Father before acting. So must we. Perhaps today, before we speak or decide or move, we could begin where he began, on the mountain, in silence and in prayer. And to those listening at home, make time to stop by a church today, to visit with God on his mountain. By the way, our church is always open during daylight hours for you to do just that. Because when we stand on the foundation of Christ, our cornerstone, even the cracks in our hearts begin to heal. And when that happens, the whole house, our families, our parish, even our very souls, can finally stand tall again.